Folks, we are live. Now, tonight's show is something that has never happened on this channel or anywhere else in the Fandom Menace. We have a man who has worked for Lucasfilm, who has worked directly under George Lucas, who has done it all. His name is Russell, and he is here tonight with me, and we're going to talk about his illustrious career working on things such as Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Batman the Animated Series, and a whole lot more. So, folks, hit that thumbs up button if you like what we do, and get ready because tonight is going to be a hell of a show. So, Russell, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Jeff. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for reaching out and wanting to do this. We have a mutual friend who will remain anonymous, but he worked this out and made this happen. He's a big fan of the channel, the Fandom Menace, and he thought that you and I would have a great show together. Now, the audience doesn't know this, but we've actually met, and we've had really long discussion once before. So when people are asking, who's this person? You know, are they legit? Yes, they are. I've met you. You're a real person. I've seen your work. It's fantastic. And the best part is everyone has seen your work here in this chat. So,
good.
Yeah, I'm going to show a picture, the one that we had talked about earlier, and everyone's going to go, "Oh, wow, you did this? Yes, this is you. You are an artist. You've done concept work. You've done all kinds of work with some of the biggest entertainment that we've all consumed, especially people in my age group with Batman the Animated Series." So, folks, here you go. This is a piece of Russell's work. This is fantastic. He's official from Lucasfilm. So
he's legit.
Yes, he's legit, 100% legit. So now, as I said, folks, on all the build-up to this show, this will be roughly a 2-hour stream. Russell does have a life and other personal things that he has to take care of. So get your questions now, and we will address them at the second half of the show. So, Russell, tell the audience, how you got into art. What was the inspiration? Did you grow up drawing? Was there someone that introduced it to you? Or, how did you find art?
Oh, thanks for the question. When I was very young, my dad worked at KTVU Channel 2 in Oakland, and he always had tons of paper and things like that was coming from the newsroom. And he'd always bring this paper because they were going to just throw it out, and then I'd use the back of it. He'd bring all these piles of paper home, and I just draw and draw. And I think I started drawing at a very, very young age, probably 2, whenever you could hold a pencil. And I was already drawing things. So my parents saw, okay, this kid has talent apparently. So they just kept encouraging me, and I just kept drawing. And oddly enough, when I did start drawing things, first things I drew were spaceships and people in space and rockets and all kinds of things like that. But then also, my father was a very large influence on me. He would wake me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which was the time when he would go to work. And he'd wake me up and take me to the TV in the living room, and I'd watch the Apollo spacecraft launches. And that was a big deal for me. And also because he worked at Channel 2, he could bring home tons and tons of news dockets that they were getting from NASA. So he'd bring home all these booklets full of NASA information, full of aerospace information, and I would just comb through these, like just absolutely fascinated. But I think the real turning point was when he took me to see 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was only 5 years old, and I think if I got my math correct, I think I was 5 or 4 years old, and I was stunned. I mean, I was literally stunned by that movie. I didn't know what to make of the journey into the infinite. I mean, that's a tough thing for a little kid to take. The monkey scene I thought was okay, kind of bored me. But boy, when we got into space, that really, really had a huge effect on me, and still does. I mean, Kubrick's movie, I think, affected everybody in an enormous way, including obviously George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and all the guys that we really admire. So, and then that led to my doing art, in grade school and high school, and I was always the, sort of like, the best artist in the school everywhere, in Mission High and things like that. They were always asking for me to do artwork for, whatever yearbooks and all kinds of things like that. And I was at that time I was sort of in between things. I mean, um, I was into comics in a very, very big way. I love Jack Kirby. Um, I love all the guys, Vince Coletta, the inker that used to do Kirby's work. I used to really love all that stuff. And then Star Wars came out in '77, and I think I was 14 by then. And of course, that movie when it came out, it just stunned everybody because it was so unique and interesting to look at, and it was exciting. And I think when I tried to see the movie in San Francisco, because I grew up in San Francisco, um, the Coronet Theater uh, had a line going around the block to get in to see Star Wars for a year, entire year. The line to get to see Star Wars was going around the block, and I couldn't see Star Wars. I didn't want to stand in that line because you had to literally get there at 6 o'clock in the morning and then hope you can get the evening show. I mean, it was that ridiculous. But Star Wars was a huge deal back then because it was so different from anything else that had come out. Obviously, they took cues from 2001, The Space Odyssey, and a few other movies. You know, we know that George Lucas used the Hidden Fortress as a template and a few other things, but we didn't even see that. I mean, everybody just saw this phenomenal movie, and I saw this thing when I eventually got to see it. I had to I wanted to figure out how to be a part of this or how they did it, and so the books came out, The Art of Star Wars. That one particular book, The Art of Star Wars, the first book, it came out, and I just ravaged over it, and it became my Bible, because there was never any really good books that came out about the making of 2001, which is a shame because they didn't capitalize on that. But when Star Wars came out, it was a stroke of genius for George to let out a book like that, because then we got to see Ralph McQuarrie's work, we got to see John Marlowe's work, we got to see Joe Johnstone, we got to see Ellen Shaw, we got to see all the artwork that went into the making and the planning of that movie. And so I find out that Ralph McQuarrie is the big, he was the guy that sort of created the overall feel of the movie. He didn't specifically design things, but he at least created the feel of Star Wars and the look of it. And George used those paintings to sell the movie to the executives. And I said, I want to do that. so I had to find out what school he went to, and I just focused on going in that direction. And so I went to Art Center and learned illustration and things like that. That's what Ralph McQuarrie did. And if you just keep focusing in a specific direction, eventually, hopefully, things are going to come your way, and eventually things did. It was great.
It sounds like you're the ultimate fan. I mean, you live the ultimate fan fantasy. You're a fan of something, you get to pursue a passion, and then you get to leave an impact on the thing that you're passionate about. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I think everybody that's in anything would love to have that sort of impact on something that they love.
Yeah, I guess I had the drive, and I was fortunate. I had a lot of good friends and a lot of good artist friends that sort of saw the interest and helped me along the way. No man is an island. So, but I did that with Batman the Animated Series. When we first started, I did pre-production paintings for the show, and they liked my pre-production paintings so much, they ended up using them to show the executives, which was terrific, what the new series was going to look like. So that turned out pretty cool too.
So let's go back real quick briefly. So before Batman the Animated Series, what was that your first professional animation job, or what did you do prior to Batman?
Prior to Batman, I was at a company called Deke.
Oh, I know Deke.
Yeah, they did Cops and Captain Planet and Alf Tales and things like that.
Was
And
were you before Inspector Gadget, or was that before your time?
I think it was around that time. I think.
Excellent. I love that show.
When was Inspector Gadget?
Before I was born. I think 83.
Yeah, that's before I was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and then there's actually quite a lot of there were quite a lot of great artists that were working at Deke. A lot of the guys that were there have moved on and they have done bigger and better things. But it was at that time there wasn't a whole lot in terms of jobs, like especially compared to today. Today, there's the entertainment field is enormous, and concept art jobs and jobs doing any kind of art, it's all over the place now. So that's really terrific that that's going on now.
So with Batman animated series, how long were you? You just did the pre-production stuff. Did you stay on the series long, or was it more of a I come in, I do my work, I move on to the next thing?
Oh God, the Batman crew was probably one of the best experiences I've had in the time I've been in the business. We had a terrific crew, and we had a terrific boss, Gene McCurdy, who was running Warner Brothers at the time. And we had Eric Radomski and Bruce Timm were our producers. So those guys were absolutely terrific to work for. And I had a great time. We all had a great time. In fact, we had such a great time, and that we get together every year around Christmas time and just talk about all the fun that we had on that production.
Oh, that is awesome.
But I worked on it from the very beginning. I was like the third person hired on the show to the very end, which was 5 years. 5 years on Batman, the animated series.
Were you involved with any of the redesigns that the show went through?
No.
Okay.
No, by then I had moved on.
Okay.
I went over to HBO for a little while. I was at another company that's now been bought out called Turner Features. I worked with Brad Bird for a little bit, doing pre-production paintings for Ray Gunn, which was a project he had been working on before Iron Giant, and which had a terrific script. That script was great. It's too bad it never got made. And then I worked on a few other productions. Eventually, I got to the Clone Wars with Gendy, and that's because I had a friend, Mike Kim, who introduced me to Gendy because he worked with Gendy on Samurai Jack. But Gendy liked my work because it looked like Ralph McCoy's work, and that's why he hired me to be a painter on that show. So.
Now, briefly before we jump into the Star Wars talk, which I know the audience is dying for, you mentioned HBO, and so that was Spawn, correct?
Yeah, I worked a little bit on Spawn.
Did you ever have any interaction with Todd McFarlane?
No, I did not. Yeah.
I actually went back and watched that show not too long ago. That show really stands up compared to what else was coming out around 98, 99. That was It was nice to see that level of animation reach television, because I mean we're still, 90s. You had some great stuff, but it was before we had like another design evolution.
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring up, because when Batman the Animated Series came out, it sort of revolutionized the look of a lot of animated projects, and they did. There were a lot of projects that other companies, they wanted to emulate Batman because it did so well. So let's see. So Spawn was one of them. They were using that black paper look, with black. It's sort of black paper with white paint or light paint. And then there was a Gargoyles, which was I think it was DreamWorks. I think it was a DreamWorks project. And they also wanted to emulate that look. And then also there was another show that I worked on briefly called Invasion America. And Steven Spielberg was the executive producer on that. But that was an alien invasion animated series. And he also wanted to have that kind of dark, lit up, sort of negative look as well. So it was a very popular look that came from Batman the Animated Series that went on to a bunch of other different projects.
Now, wasn't the official term Dark Deco for the Batman art style?
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. Yeah, yeah, Dark Deco. Mm-hmm.
I have there's this fantastic book. I mean, I'm sure your work's in it. We hadn't met by when I bought this book, but it's called Batman the Animated Series, like something, and it's nothing but the production. It's production sheets, a lot of blue pencil drawings and stuff like that. I'm gonna have to go in and see if any of your stuff is in it now. Now that we've met.
Is it the book? Is it the art of Batman the Animated Series? Is it like that?
Yeah, it's like I think is his name Chip Kidd is the author or something like that. It's a fantastic book. I'm sure your stuff's in it because when I looked up some of your contributions to the series, I'm like, well, that's an iconic drawing from the show, so that has to be a part of it.
Yeah, my work is in there, and my work is also still being shown at the Warner Brothers lot too. So if you ever get a chance to go take a tour of the Warner Brothers Museum, you go onto the lot, you can see my Batman, Batmobile painting and the Bat boat. They have those two. I think those two paintings at the Warner Brothers Museum.
I'm looking at the that everyone in my age group knows that Batmobile design, the big roadster. Now, how does it feel? Random question: how does it make you feel as an artist to see that the work that you put in has really lived on as long as it has? And stuff with Batman and the Clone Wars, that's not going to go anywhere. I mean, those are just kind of staples of the multi-generational staples, not just 90s or early mid-thousands type of stuff. But how does that make you feel going back and knowing like, wow, this thing that I did is timeless, and that's a part of me.
I love it. I love it because I believe in timelessness. I've always felt that when a project or when a production has a timeless feel to it, that you're reaching the core of people's spirit, and these types of projects last in the consciousness of the people who experience it much longer. It's kind of like obviously, again, I'll discuss 2001. That has struck such a chord in everyone since 1968, since it came out in 1968. It still has not been topped today, and still people love that movie. I mean, no one has ever made a movie like it since. Of course, there's various reasons for that, right? Because it's not exactly a commercial type of movie where you can have throngs of people wanting to see it because it's so intellectually sort of out there. It's hard for people to understand. But things like Lawrence of Arabia and other classic movies, like Scorsese's, a lot of Scorsese's early movies are classics that they just Kurosawa. I love Kurosawa movies, but all those things they don't go away because they strike a chord, in the soul of people, and that stuff. It's hard for that stuff to dissipate. So, but I love it because that's what I'm always after. I'm always after, what lasts. What makes something last in the conscious mind of anybody, and how do you make that become a positive experience for people? So that's always been my thing.
Well, you definitely did. I mean, I'm even looking about your you're credited. I don't know if you're credited, but when I looked you up for Batman stuff, Mask of the Phantasm pops up as well. Was that a positive experience? Because I mean, I don't know if the movie lived up to a lot of the studio's box office expectation, but I mean, it's considered the best Batman film by a lot of people. I mean, there's lists where it's ranked next to The Dark Knight. Anything positive that you remember from that one?
Well, with Mask of the Phantasm, what was interesting about that was they wanted to they didn't want to spend any more money than they were already spending on Batman, and I think at that time, Batman the Animated Series was probably one of the most expensive animated TV shows on TV at the time. So I think Gene McCurdy didn't want to spend more money, or Warner Brothers didn't want to spend extra money on it. So what we did was we just incorporated it into the TV production. And so, in other words, we just continued doing what we were doing. And then they took the work that we did and they just sewed it together and made a movie out of it. So I wish we had a little more time to do things and a little more of a budget. But that's the way it was back then. But which is, what you're telling me right now, that's great that it still has legs, that Mask of the Phantasm is still, people are still enjoying that. So that's how that sort of came about.
Yeah,
but I personally didn't, in terms of emotion and the feeling at the time, it was like we were just doing the same thing. We're just continuing on with Batman the Animated Series, but they just took all the work and turned it into a movie. So that's kind of like emotionally where it all went.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was a thing that kind of came and went when I was a kid. I knew there was a movie. I didn't see it on tape right away, but yeah, it definitely has legs. I mean, it's included in all the box sets. It gets special releases. I don't know if they've done like a anniversary release screening, but I mean, it definitely is. It's still an important Batman film. Sub-Zero and the later ones, not so much, but definitely Mask of the Phantasm.
Yeah, I know it's really gratifying to see that. I go to toy stores and things like that, and they're still making Batmobiles from Batman the Animated Series, and they're still, and I heard the Blu-ray came out recently, which is great. So it's amazing because we worked on that way back in the '90s, and it's still, people still love it. But I got to say, I think the writers did a fantastic job. Eric Radomski and Bruce Timm, everybody did a fantastic job. Paul Dini, I'm sorry. He wrote a lot of great scripts, and it was a great project. One of the projects I had the most fun on, I'd have to say.
Now, do you still follow any of the Batman stuff, or is it just Batman's fine to you, but not something you follow in your personal life?
I think I gave up on Batman after all the Joe Schumacher iterations. Right?
Fair enough.
We had Val Kilmer, then we had George Clooney, and then I don't remember which order it was, but it just kept changing. Like they kept changing the act. I mean, I suppose it's kind of like James Bond, right?
Yeah.
You can change the actor and it doesn't matter. But I think after a while, for me personally, I like to glom onto one particular series or one particular type of production, and then if any preceding productions go on and then they change it too much or they do something I didn't care for, then I kind of move on. Sort of like I like the Tobey Maguire, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans.
Same here.
And yeah, so
I feel like they hit the high point. But I just wanted to give the audience a brief, snapshot into your pre-Star Wars career, because now the show is going to focus heavily on Star Wars, go beyond just the art, stuff like that with Lucasfilm. So,
thanks.
I even said to you off air when I moved, what's the few things I brought with me? My Batman the Animated Series figure. I love that show. I bought the Blu-ray set. It's perfect. It's funny though how in today's world Marvel is the household name with synonymous with superheroes, but when you were working on Batman, DC all the way. They had the big budget movies, they had the cartoons, the games, they had it all. So it's funny how things switch.
You know what I need to do, Jeff? I actually need to watch Batman the Animated Series because I have not watched it since I worked on it, and I only watched each episode after we finished them, in the screening room or something like that. That's the only time I've seen them, or on TV. And I know I need to rewatch it, and I'm doing that right now with Clone Wars. I did not see any of the Clone Wars on TV because we always saw it in the screening room at Lucasfilm, and I watched it there, and then I was kind of like, okay, got to move on to the next one. And so I'm rewatching them now, and I'm really enjoying it. I think the crew did a standout job on that production. So.
Oh, definitely. One final point I'll make: if you're going to go back and do Batman, if you got the time, watch it on Blu-ray because they remastered it and it looks so much better than DVD possibly could. So I mean, they went back and it looks fantastic.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that for sure.
So you brought up working on Star Wars: The Clone Wars. That's let's, if you don't mind, let's jump to the 2003 series. You said you worked with Genndy Tartakovsky.
Yeah.
So he was known for a ton of shows in the 90s, Samurai Jack. A lot of people get him mixed up with Craig McCracken with the Powerpuff Girls, but I believe it was Genndy that worked on Dexter's Laboratory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're right.
So
I was going to say Powerpuff Girls too, but
they
you're right.
look so similar. I honestly would have made that mistake unless, I have a girlfriend who likes the Powerpuff Girls, so she is into it more. But so we're in early, I guess, 2002. What do these things usually take about a year out from conceptualization to actual production? Is that how that works usually for a timetable?
For for 2D animation, I think you can count on maybe. I mean, it depends on the length of the animation, but I'd say for a 22-minute series, it probably would be maybe 5 to 6 months before you get to see the final product. Because after we get it back from after we get the animation back from the outside contractors, then they take it and they apply all the sound, they do all the editing, and then they do all the telecine, and they do all these things to the product to finish it off, So that takes another month or so in the high-speed world of 2D animation. But for the Clone Wars, okay, if we're talking about Gendy's Clone Wars,
Yes.
I'm not sure exactly how long it took, but I think it was around 6 months or around that time is by the time, from the time I worked on it to the time it finally aired on TV, it was something like that. So.
Oh, because that was a very stylized show, but that artwork style has definitely found a home among Star Wars fans, because that show, I don't think it's ever been like officially released in high definition, but people, still go on about that show, how great that one was. And it was weird too, because it had such little dialogue. Star Wars has these great speeches and iconic lines, but that was, some episodes had just sound effects and music, not a lot of recorded dialogue. Were there any memorable experiences working on that show, either behind the scenes or anything that was a challenge for you as an artist?
I think one of the first things that comes up about my memory of working on the Clone Wars. I mean, this may sound kind of ridiculous, but my commute was 5 minutes to get to work, and that was one big memory I have of that. Because you always want a short commute as much as possible, because you don't want to spend all this time on the road, and it's exhausting getting to work if it's a long ways away. So that was really wonderful, having a short commute, but also working with Gendy was fun. And Gendy, he had a very distinct idea of how it should look, and that was one thing that I had to alter in my painting style, because even though he wanted it to look like Ralph McQuarrie artwork, he also had some very high key, high contrast scenes and some very low key, dark scenes. So some of those, sometimes when you do paintings like that, they're pretty difficult, because you're not dealing with normal light. You're dealing with like something that's been blown out, contrast wise and stuff like that. So those were things that were challenging. But I'd have to say that experience wise, it was fun. It was fun to be able to work on Star Wars. That was my first time I got to work on a Star Wars project. And I didn't have any idea. Obviously, none of us had any idea that the 3D animated project was coming our way eventually. So, yeah.
So now, after you worked on the 2003 series, prior to that, had you already been pretty established at Lucasfilm? How long before that, or had you been at Lucasfilm before that show, or was that your first? You
mean Clone Wars? The Clone Wars, the 3D animated?
No, sorry. Let me elaborate. So you worked on the 2003 show. Now, were you at Lucasfilm mainly at that point in time, or were you doing other things?
No, that was actually done at Cartoon Network.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Cartoon Network, and then Gendy was going back and forth up at Lucasfilm and coming back down here. I think he might have been doing the sound up there, if I'm not mistaken. But I think we got reference artwork from Lucasfilm, but no, we were not at Lucasfilm. We were at Cartoon Network. So and
Okay.
that's where Gendy was still working on projects at that production house.
So let us fast forward to your time at Lucasfilm. So how did that come about? So what do you remember with applying to Lucasfilm or anything memorable in your build to that
Well,
company?
see, well, see, my wife was friends with Dave Filoni when Dave Filoni was starting out in the business, in the animation business, and we got together one time. I met Dave for the first time. We got together at my wife's when she was we weren't married yet, but she was at an apartment, and we got together at this apartment with a bunch of friends, and we did Star Wars. Uh, what do you call it? We did a Star Wars game together, Trivial Pursuit,
Oh, okay.
and that's when Dave saw my portfolio for the first time. But we were playing Trivial Pursuit, and I thought I knew a lot about Star Wars. I knew a lot about um, the secondary characters and things like that. But Dave aced all of us. Dave just destroyed us in the knowledge of Star Wars. I mean, he was his knowledge of Star Wars was he knew every single answer on Star Wars Trivial Pursuit, and it was pretty funny. I was pretty astonished at his knowledge of like not only secondary characters but tertiary characters and all kinds of other things. That most people don't know about. So I knew Dave from way back when, and Henry Gilroy, who was the head writer for the Clone Wars. I was friends with him from Warner Brothers of Batman. We Henry Gilroy and we were friends, and we got together and we did a lot of stuff together, a lot of interesting things, as friends do. And then I don't know where Henry and Dave met, but they were friends as well. And when George, with Catherine Winder, I think she went up there and was setting up a team. She picked Dave Filoni. Well, found Dave Filoni or knew Dave Filoni, and had Dave meet George. And I think when George met Dave and found that Dave was an encyclopedia for Star Wars and also an animation director, I think that was all George needed. So then Dave came back down and started setting up his team, and he got Henry, and he got me. I was supposed to be the art director, and we met at the Lancer's restaurant over on Victory Boulevard here in Burbank, and we talked about what we were going to do and things like that. This is even before we got to Lucasfilm, and so they went up and they got started to get things going, and I continued down here for a while. And I think I don't know how many months went by, 3 months or so went by, and then eventually I got called up there, and we started working on the ranch at the carriage house. It's just it's behind the main house at Skywalker Ranch.
So tell the audience, since his name has come up a few times, what was your first impression of George Lucas when you met the man who created this expansive, iconic universe? What was that like for you as a Star Wars fan?
Well, back then, obviously not now because George is not there anymore, but back then there were very stringent protocols about how you interact with George. And basically, I think it even said on a piece of paper, you cannot go up to George, and you cannot talk to George. George has to talk to you. If George is going to talk, he's going to talk to you, but you can't go to George and talk to him. And there were other protocols that I had heard about. I think at one time the cafeteria had alcohol, and at one time the cafeteria had alcohol, and I think one of the guys got drunk, and he went over to George, when he wasn't supposed to, and started blathering at George, and George said, "No more alcohol." Got rid of the alcohol at the ranch. But yeah, there's very stringent protocols about that, and I understand, because George is such an important person and he's a big figure, especially up at the ranch. He's the king, and you can't have just any old employee going up to him and say, ooh, I want to meet you, I want to talk to you, I want to shake your hand, blah blah blah. You just have to be professional. I think mainly is what it is. You just have to be professional, no matter how big the stars in your eyes are. So I think that is the main protocol. So I never personally said, hello, George, my name's Russell, good to meet you. I never did that. But he was always there, walking around, and he was always there saying hi. And occasionally, we could talk to him at some of the picnics and stuff like that, say hi and how you doing and things like that. But always, very surfacey, never got too deep. And I don't think George would, if you got deep, I think he would just walk away anyways. He wouldn't let you get too deep with him. So yeah, that's how it is. That's how it was with George. So he was there, but most of us could not engage with him unless George was engaging with us. You know what I mean?
Was there any tension? Like, did you ever feel nervous because of those protocols? Did you ever feel like, because you're talking about coming from Batman and other shows where, I mean, you mentioned everyone at the Batman the Animated Series show that you talked with, you still meet. I assume you had a great relationship with Bruce, Tim, and all those guys and ladies. Were you nervous at all? Where you're like, I'm here, I'm good enough, I'm qualified, but like, there's just a little tension at all? Was there ever that? Any nerves?
Well, working up at the ranch is actually a really wonderful experience. I mean, we all of us who worked on the Clone Wars, we loved it there because the energy is terrific there. It's got wonderful energy. You're surrounded with trees, and there's a winery. I mean, it's just a beautiful place. I mean, the main house is beautiful, and the carriage house we were working in, it's like working in a mansion. You're working in somebody's house, and it had creaky floors and bedrooms, and it's really a fun place to work. And I think that besides that, you had the pressure to get the job done and to do a good job. I mean, obviously, you're working on Star Wars, you love Star Wars, and you want to do the most incredible work you can on the project. So you've got this wonderful location and these wonderful surroundings juxtaposed with, I got to do the best job I can. So it was a little bit of a bit of a conflict there. Like I loved, we had a tennis court and swimming pool and a nice, we had a nice places to eat, and it was. But then at the same time, you have your deadlines, and you want to kick some butt. So yeah, it's kind of a strange, crux, so to speak, in terms of working there.
So you mentioned the word deadline. Now, what, for example, let's just say on an episode of the Clone Wars, from your job standpoint, how much time would you put into a single episode?
Okay, well that's something that we worked on in the first 2 years of working on the Clone Wars. Because this was sort of a new project, and it's never, as far as nothing like that has ever been done. You got to consider the fact that George was spending his own money on this project. He had no network. Usually every single project you see on TV or anywhere, it has a network attached to it, and the network is paying for the production, paying for the animation or whatever. But George was spending all of his own money. And obviously we know that George knew that whatever he made with a tagged with Star Wars, it was going to sell to some network. So I think he had that confidence. So we had that. So we worked for 2 years just setting up the show, setting up the production, setting up the pipeline, and trying to figure out how much time we could spend on particular assets. Assets meaning characters, backgrounds, or sets, actually, because it's 3D, and props. And the Malevolence arc was one where we learned that we can never do a project like that again. The Malevolence arc, that was based on the movie Sink the Bismarck. And I spent a month and a half working on the Malevolence. And as an artist and a designer, I wish I could have had more time, but a month and a half was too long. A month and a half was too much. We decided after the Malevolence that we could only spend 3 weeks on any asset. So we could never build gigantic spaceships anymore because they were just going to take too much time. And because some of your listeners may know, when you build something, when you make something really big, you have to have several different versions of it. You have to have a distant version, a middle version, and a close-up version. And the same thing goes for CG. Because if you do something with a lot of surface detail, you need the surface detail for scale. And if the Malevolence, George originally wanted the Malevolence to be 20 Star Destroyers long. And we were just like, whoa, you know what I mean? How are we going to do this? And I started working on the design, but then eventually they concluded, they were telling me, George said, let's make it 7 Star Destroyers long because 20 was going to be too much. Even 7 Star Destroyers long was really a lot, because you have to put a ton of detail in there to give it scale, right? The smaller the detail, the bigger it looks. And we just couldn't do it in the time we had. So what they ended up doing, instead of putting like what they say greeblies, all those model kit parts to make something look really cool, we covered it with a texture, like an interesting texture map, and that gave it panel detail, looked like tons and tons of paneling on this thing. And I designed, I wanted to design 5 or 7 classes of guns, like a battleship. Battleships have 5 classifications of guns, like the biggest ones and all the way down to the small anti-aircraft ones. And I only had time for 2. And one of my anti-spacecraft guns on the Malevolence was like the size of the Millennium Falcon. I mean, they're huge guns, and then they get smaller and smaller. But I only had time for 2. But yeah, so that's where we learned how to figure out how much time we were going to spend. That was one of the things that we learned, at least for assets like that.
So when you bring up something like the 20 Star Destroyers, do you have any memory of ideas that George had that were just too big that someone had to talk him out of, or that he eventually came around and was like, well, maybe this is a little too ambitious? Like outside of the Malevolence scale, do you have any other memories of like just things that you're like, we can't do this, and then it took him a little convincing, but he eventually got came down to earth with it?
No, I can't. I actually can't think of anything else. I mean, that was the big lesson for our production as well as the overseas studios that we were working with, which was, George Lucas, he created Lucasfilm Animation Singapore. I don't know if anybody knows about that. Animation Singapore was the production studio that George created over there, with Mitch Chow, who was a Singaporean and was running Lucasfilm at the time. And then there was also, I think we were using CG, which is a Japanese company. They actually worked on Batman, the animated series. So CG's been around for a long time, and they've been doing great work for a long time. So that was interesting too.
Yeah. So when you started in that 2-year period and everything, what about what were some of the other responsibilities you had during that 2-year period? Like you talked earlier with Gendy and his Clone Wars with very, design, like very unique designs. The Clone Wars has a very unique style that a lot of Star Wars fans have just, come to love. They definitely changed up a few things in the Star Wars lore, but people have accepted that. Is there any let me rephrase it. Were there any design challenges for you that were memorable?
Well, I kind of know what you're asking because yeah, I mean, originally when we first started working on the Clone Wars, the original idea was to take Ralph McQuarrie paintings and make them look 3D. So what the guys did was they took some Ralph McQuarrie paintings and they multiplaned them, and then they would do a pan, and it would look terrific. And eventually that led to, and I don't know how the decision came down, but eventually it led to us going from sort of 2D multiplaning to actual full-on 3D production. And I think probably more than likely George was like, yeah, let's do it, you know. So the design challenges, I think, in terms of design challenges, I think all of the designs were just so much fun. I didn't really consider them a challenge, but the challenge with things like the Malevolence, where you want to do a lot but you don't have enough time to do it, those are really challenges. But which we learned early on in the first 2 years when we were working at the ranch. Eventually, we had to start hiring more people because there were 3 consecutive productions going on at once. So we'd be doing actually 3 episodes at the same time when we were going into full production. So when we first started, we were doing 1 at a time. Eventually, we went to 2 at a time, and then 3 at a time. And with 3 at a time, you need at the very least, you need 3 concept artists on each episode. So eventually, we ended up with 12 concept artists. But in the beginning, it was myself, Killian Plunkett, and Tang Lee. We were the first 3. And then we were doing concept work, and we were doing color storyboards. And color storyboards, you're taking animatics and you're painting them to give them lighting and color and all kinds of other things that the overseas studios need. And it was just too much. I mean, we were just like, oh my God, we got to design this. And oh my God, we got to do the color board. It just became too much. And eventually they had to hire painters to do the color scripts. And then we could just continue on with doing the concept work. And then eventually we went from, 2 episodes at a time to 3 episodes at a time when we were in full production. So I think by the time we got to the 3rd season, we were probably doing 3 episodes at the same time with 3 different groups of people working on each episode.
Now, with a project like the Clone Wars, it's definitely an introduction for a lot of people, like say a generation into the Star Wars universe. Do you ever recall any discussions on how to appeal to the modern generation to get a new era of Star Wars fans to find the movies, get involved with the lore, the universe, the figures, the characters, and all that stuff, and keep Star Wars alive? Was that ever a discussion that you've either had yourself or had heard discussed about the Clone Wars?
Well, yeah, I think all of us knew what made Star Wars have its look and its feel. I think most of us were pretty aware of that. Some of the people working on it were more of the key holders to giving it the right tone and the right quality. Definitely Henry Gilroy knew how to give the stories the right kind of tone, especially in the prequel era, right? Because we're talking post-prequel. And so you're talking about pre-prequel. All those movies have a tone to it. Obviously, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi has a look and a feel and a way of telling the story. But then the prequels were very different. They were very much more complex, and they had a lot more characters and a lot more assets. And I think what Dave and Henry and George were doing was they were trying to combine sort of the feel of the original movies with the prequels and try and get that sort of classic feel to them and give them that quality, that Star Wars quality, that tone. My job was more of a superficial one where I was trying to get the look of the show to be like, the original movies and the prequels. So, my favorite thing, I love Star Wars. My favorite is the original movie. I like Empire too, and everybody says Empire is a superior movie, but I still think Star Wars has that. It has that wow quality to it. It's like the first one, and it gave the tone and the feel of what Star Wars is all about. And I think we all pretty much were aware of that, and we were all pretty much trying to give it that quality, So,
you and I are definitely on the same page with the A New Hope, or the first one, being a personal favorite and the impact. I think there in geek culture or just in popular culture in general, there's a set of ideas that people adopt to try to just, I have to conform to the norm. And Empire Strikes Back is a 10 out of 10 movie, but I feel like a lot of people say that because it's just kind of the said thing. And I think a lot of people do sleep on the original's impact, that for as great as Empire is, the twist, the imagery, nothing really comes close to the first film in terms of the impact and just what it produces. And I do like, hearing that answer from you, that's what they acknowledge it on the inside, and that's what they go for. They're not worried about the minutia of Empire. They're going for the whole feel of Star Wars.
Yeah, and the thing one of the things that I personally love about Star Wars is the wonder that you get from the movie. You get this sense of, oh my God, what is this? And oh my gosh, what is that? What is this alien? And what is this spaceship? And look at that city. But see, none of your questions are answered, but you have a lot of mystery, and you have a lot of what is that? It's fascinating, right? Look at the stormtrooper. Oh my God, I remember when stormtroopers first showed up in the press, and for the first time back in '77, people were like, what the hell is that? They didn't know what that was. I mean, today it's so normal. Everybody knows what a stormtrooper is. Everybody knows what Darth Vader is. But those two characters were created by Ralph McQuarrie. He created Darth Vader's face shield and armor, and he created the stormtroopers, and they were, back then, they were shocking. Nobody knew what that was back then. And to me, I think that's what I like about Star Wars is it's the mystery. It's like when you go into the cantina and you see all those aliens and you go, oh my God, what is their story? And how did they get there? And, where did they fly in from? And what does their spaceship look like? And you see that, outside of Tatooine, you see all these spaceships and robots and things, and you don't get your questions answered, but you have a lot of things to wonder about. And I think that's what really, and then of course you have mythology, you have that deep mythology in Star Wars, and that is really, really important for human beings. Human beings need that that idea of a force, and this magical force that can help you fight evil and things like that. Or it also has a corollary, right? It has evil and it has goodness to it, and that is what I think the epitome of Star Wars is. It's all about mythology and about the mystery of going out into space and seeing all these different creatures out there, So,
well, now a lot of fans feel that modern Star Wars has lost that, the mythology, the feel, the grandiose nature. As a Star Wars fan yourself, let's talk just for a brief moment, since it feels like a natural course. How do you feel about the newer, more modern stuff? I mean, as a fan, are you satisfied? I know a lot of people in this community, myself included, were very underwhelmed to angry to beyond anger. What were some of your thoughts about the new films? And then then I'm gonna follow up with some of the missing elements of the newer films.
Yeah. Well, I think JJ's really good with characters. I think he's really good with drama. I think what's missing is, the thing that George always said to us on the Clone Wars. He always said, more assets, more assets, more assets. And that's totally missing in these movies. They're like reusing the X-Wing and reusing, everything. The walkers are just shifted a little bit. They're changed a little bit, but Star Destroyer is a little bit different. But I think that's what's missing is really, Star Wars has got a lot of really fun toys in it, There's lots of really cool spaceships and lots of surprises and lots of interesting ideas. And I would like to have seen more of that in the new movies. More of that, and I think Rey should have had a little more training. She needed more training. No human being suddenly has the capability of wielding a sword, and then, beating or fighting like somebody who's had tons of experience with it. Nobody can do that. That's not human. That's inhuman. I don't even know if that's alien. If an alien can do that, but so I think we needed more of that, because those are aspects of being a human. That's part of our history. Is we've always had teachers who always had wisdom, and we always learn from people who are older and people who have wisdom, and that is severely missing in these new episodes. So I'm not sure kind of where that was coming from, but we could have used more of that. We could have used more, like I said, more assets. Like George always says, we need. This is a whole new time. This is obviously after the Death Star has been destroyed. So I would say the Empire maybe could have had newer, more high-tech ships. They could have had different things. So I think things could have been probably a little bit more updated, I think, in that way. And yeah.
Well, now some have said the reason for you brought up it's an X-wing, it's a TIE fighter, it's a Star Destroyer. A lot of people think Disney was just trying to capture the feel. Like they're basically trying to give you a bare bones visual. Hey, this is Star Wars. Remember Star Wars? And they, like you brought up with Rey, she didn't have training. And when you do watch the original trilogy, there aren't as many moments where the viewer goes, wait, why is this a thing? Or why is that a thing? Like you take certain things on faith, there's this suspension of disbelief, but there aren't really moments where it's like, for example, Luke Skywalker is this excellent fighter pilot at the end of the film. But if you watch the film any amount of time, just once, it tells you multiple times he's a great pilot. Oh, I can't believe you're this. You're the best bush pilot. When you get to
Yeah.
like Rey, it's just like you said, there's no fill in. And you even called them the Empire, the First Order. We, as an audience in the movies, we never found out how they came to power. We never found out what happened, why they have another Star Killer Death Star ripoff. Like all these things, there are too many questions. I think when you talked about the mystery earlier of Star Wars, you really hit the balance of what George Lucas did right, where it's the mystery of the unknown. It's not mystery where I'm asking a million questions. Do you think that a lot of film and just entertainment in general that is a continuation, so IP-based stuff, do you think a lot of them are guilty with not really building a world or having built-in logic, and they just go for, you remember this iconic image and that iconic image, and they think that will sell the project?
Yeah, I mean, see, now we're getting into an area where, politics start coming into play. And I think what happens is oftentimes what a lot of people on the outside are unaware of, and that goes on the inside in production, is, it's politics. And politics, unfortunately, is in a human endeavor. I mean, because we're human, it's going to happen. But what's going to happen is, nepotism, things like that, or you're friends with someone and you want to give them a chance. Say you're a script writer, you're working on a prominent show, and you've got a buddy who you want to get into the show with him, and he may not be so good at things, but he's your buddy, and you're going to let him in, and he's going to do work on your show and stuff like that. I mean, that's the issue we're dealing with here. Because I've listened to you guys, I've listened to your shows, and I totally agree with things that you guys are concerned about. But the problem is politics, and you would have to almost put yourself in the shoes of the people that are in charge of these projects, and think about their position as well. And their position is probably they'll probably react in the same way we all react. We wouldn't really hire people right off the street that said, hey, I'm really good. We'd have to make sure they had a reputation, or they had a friend that had said they have a good reputation, and then we hire them. And then, oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but sometimes, and I've done it before, I've been guilty where, I've hired someone, or I've recommended someone that I thought would have been good in a particular position, and they ended up not doing well. And that either could be for various factors or various reasons, like they're not, maybe they had some things going on in their life, and their life is not, they're not on top of things anymore, or they're just not interested, but they want to work on the project, but they're just not as well versed in the knowledge of a particular uh, project. But that's the thing. I mean, I think the most important thing is you got to have people on the top that are good at delegating and good at picking the right people. That's really, really important to a successful project. Um, and it all starts from the top. Everything, including all productions, even our government. Everything starts at the top and then it trickles its way down. And so when we have projects that we're disappointed with and we're like, oh my God, it could have been so much better or whatever, we have to consider all those things are probably taking place. And I would say, like, I've been on projects where politics were way out of control and talent and say maybe a person's ability was secondary or even tertiary to the project. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
this is something that fans in this community have been talking about for years because it's blatantly obvious, especially with the Star Wars stuff. I mean, they have this new woman that's taken over for a female-centric Star Wars show, and people are blowing up because this lady doesn't have a ton of qualifications. And it's not the fact that it's a woman or that it's a female-led show, but for years, the fans have noticed that people that are being chosen to write at the Lucasfilm Story Group or people that are being chosen to produce Star Wars projects, their politics outrank their knowledge or their qualifications. And that's where I think there's you listen to the show, so I talk about this, but that's where a lot of the disconnect from. And it's really nice to actually hear it from someone that has seen it directly. Like, there's no more, people can't say, oh, you guys are just reaching. No, we have someone that has seen it firsthand. Now, have you ever been, without naming like specific people, have you ever been frustrated at a situation where you're attached to something and you're like, I can't believe this outweighs, good storytelling, good artwork?
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's like anything else, right? It's like it could be anybody getting a job anywhere. Like in a Tesla factory or being a barista. Sometimes you have a manager, that's particularly care for, and because it all starts from the top. If someone is making you feel miserable or whatever, it's going to pass on down to you too. So yeah, I've been in positions where I've had someone over me, and they weren't very qualified, but they either knew someone, or they politically got themselves in a position where they could get this job, this leadership role. They've never had the experience of being in a leadership role, and this is their first time. So you gotta be professional about it. You kind of gotta go, okay, I've got a job here, and I don't want to ruffle any feathers, so I'm just going to toe the line and just hang on and try to make the best of it. And I think that's professionally what all of us in the field try to do and have to do. But I do understand totally where you guys come from, because it can get very frustrating when when you're in a position where things are not going well, and you really have to, like, suck it up. You got to be tough sometimes in the business. It's tough sometimes.
Well,
some jobs are really like dream jobs. Like Batman was a great fun. We had a great time. And some jobs are not, and you just gotta, if you want to be on the project, you gotta kind of suck it up and go for it. Or you just, or like, one way of looking at it too, I guess you could say, is when you have an issue with something, you have to sort of change your mindset. You kind of gotta go, okay, this is not really working out, but I'm going to make the best of it and try and deal with it. You know what I mean? And I think that that's probably, it's part and participle of life too. We're not everything's always rosy all the time. So
Now, since we're on the topic of the politics in the workplace, let's say most recent. Well, okay, so let's say modern now to then. So back in the day when you're working on Batman or a Deke, how much was was money and story and creativity a factor over personal politics and whatever ideologies may be popular, of the day?
Mm-hmm.
Like back then, was it as bad, or is this more of a more modern thing?
No, I think there's more now. There's more entertainment, and a lot of people, a lot of younger people today, they've got tons and tons and tons of fantastic entertainment. I mean, the most incredible video games, the virtual reality. They've got tons of TV shows and movies to watch, and they're at such a high level. I think when I was growing up, movies were not always that good. Movies did not have great special effects, and there were less choices. So I think that today's audience, man, they have got so much great stuff, to choose from, and I totally get it. I get into these conversations with my wife. We always talk about how she's watching a particular television series and it starts out really good and the writing is fantastic, and it goes up to whatever, second season, third season, fourth season, and then it starts to drop off. And we're like going, why? It's such a great show. But eventually what's happening on the inside, which is what nobody realizes or nobody sees, because obviously they're not going to tell you about this stuff, is, people are getting hired to do other jobs, and they're hiring new writers. Maybe this one director has never had any directing experience, but they're going to give them directing experience because they've been writing for 5 years on a particular project and they think they can do it. And so there's a lot of that stuff going on too. And that's what causes some of the variation in quality. Is you're hiring somebody that's brand new or really isn't on the ball with particular things, and then it's their first time out, and then you suddenly see a drop off in quality. You go, what happened?
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and I've listened to you guys. I've listened to you, and I've listened to Doomcock, and I agree. I agree. I wish everything could be like right on the money all the time. But like I said, when you're dealing with humans and politics, which always comes into play no matter what, that's what's going to happen. Projects are going to rise and fall and rise and fall. And I mean, we all saw what happened, with Game of Thrones. We were like, we were aghast. We were aghast at what happened with Game of Thrones. Something happened there. Something we don't know about that they're not going to tell us because it was inside the company, and they want to keep it confidential. And we don't know what happened, but on the outside, the public, like me, the viewing public, we were aghast at what happened. We were just like, what? They dropped the ball. I mean, the same thing happened with Rome too, right? Rome, first and second. Rome at HBO was fantastic. I mean, the first season was terrific. Second season started to drop off a bit, but we find out years later, they were having trouble financially with the show because it was so expensive, and whoever was running the accounting or something, it was something like that. It started to too much money was being allocated in the wrong direction, and who knows what kind of politics were going on, and then the show fell away. Supposedly HBO had learned their lesson from Rome, and they made Game of Thrones, this gigantic medieval epic, which is what Rome was supposed to be. Rome was supposed to go on for several seasons, but they had to truncate it because of all the problems they were having. So, but I totally hear you guys, and I totally get it. And I wish things could be, continue to be rosy and awesome and intense and cool, like over and over and over again, till they end it, with like a perfect ending and stuff like that, So
now you brought up the breadth of or the variety of entertainment that we can consume today, but there's been a very obvious shift in geek culture where there's an almost adversarial creator to consumer type of I won't even call them creators, because the people that really have an online pushback against the fan base, they really haven't created anything. They've just they've added divisive content. How do you feel about the modern sense of entitlement from creatives with the pushback? I mean, we see it on Twitter all the time. We see Ryan Johnson calling out fans, calling them man babies. We have writers of Star Wars books telling people to eat a boot covered in poop. I mean, over the course of the last couple of years, there's been a huge pushback. As someone who's worked on some of the most iconic things of generations for kids' entertainment and regular art, do you think that the way people conduct themselves is in bad taste, the way they conduct themselves publicly?
Are you talking about when they, you mean the comment like man babies and things like that?
Well, yeah, or just all of it. I mean, there's always this big pushback where, in the past, I've never met George Lucas, but if you have a complaint about the prequels or something, you post it online, George Lucas doesn't find you and, block you on Twitter and call you a name. There's just been a big shift. Do you think that that is in bad taste on, the creatives' behalf?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it depends on what aspect of the creation you're a part of. See, for my particular expertise, mine is more of a superficial one, right? Where I'm mostly involved with the look of a particular project, not so much obviously not so much the writing. I mean, I can make suggestions and things like that. That's as far as my input goes when it comes to writing. But I think it really depends on who's heading the projects, but when it comes to today's audience and social media and all these things, I really do think that back when I was a kid, when something sucked, we had to suck it up. We could say we hated that. We could go to a friend's house and hang out and watch a movie and say that sucked and all that. But today, because of the internet, people can say that sucks, and it goes all over the world. And I think that's fascinating, because that means that the smallest people can have the biggest voices in today's world. But in a way, I like the pressure that you guys are putting on in the entertainment world, because you're making them. I hope, I'm not certain, because I'm not in all. I'm not certain about all production houses and things like that. But the demand for high quality and the demand to make sure that IP stays consistent with its tone and its quality I think it's very important. I mean, that's what I'm after when I'm working on any project. If I'm working on, obviously when I worked on Clone Wars and when I worked on all of my projects, that's all I was about. I was like all about quality and making sure that we had the right quality, the right tone that followed suit with the project. That's very important. So I like the what you guys are doing. I mean, you guys are creating this loud voice for the fans, and we hope that the people that are in charge of these projects are listening. I mean, we hope that someone said to me that the best way to vote to reject a project or to reject anything is to not vote for it. So I think that anytime people watch something and more people watch something, they vote for it. So we have this problem now in Hollywood and where they're constantly remaking things over and over again and not coming up with new things. But I think that what has happened is Hollywood wants to make stuff that they know is going to make money. So they would rather rehash something that's old than take a chance and make something new. I mean, that's, sort of like the mindset behind that. But there are people that, so in doing that, I think that and people watching those kinds of shows. Like, oh boy, I can't wait to see that movie again with a new actress and a new director and a new writer and all this stuff. But it's the same IP. When people go to watch it, they vote for it. And then when Hollywood says, hey, it made this much money, let's do another one. So in a sense, if a project comes out and people pay for it, which is they vote for it, then it only encourages, them to make more of those things. And so that's something that needs to be, I think that's something that we need to guard against as a viewing audience,
Now, I do have a question. Since you're talking about rehashes and remakes and diminishing returns, a lot of people would say that is the case of this new Disney Star Wars trilogy. And what I'm basically asking you in a roundabout way is, do you think Disney has positioned themselves to where they've cut themselves off from future generations of Star Wars? Because we saw diminishing returns, unlike any other trilogy where it starts out strong, then it maybe peters off a bit, but then picks back up in the final chapter. We see a straight decline across the sequel trilogy, and we've also information's come out how it was so expensive to make Episode 9 that it's the least profitable of all these movies. Do you think Lucasfilm is in a position to flourish in the future, or do you think there's I'm not going to say uncertainty where they're going to close their doors and we're not going to have Star Wars anymore, but do you think there's a situation where you think Star Wars could become a much smaller IP and live among the fans, but not really grow and expand anymore?
I think we are all dying for more really good Star Wars, and I think that, again, like we were discussing earlier, Star Wars has struck a chord with all of us because of its sort of timeless values and its and the way it's made, the aliens and the fun that we have in outer space, this Western in outer space. And I think that the public has a short memory, and I think that we could probably move on and continue making new Star Wars, probably big Star Wars shows, new ideas, new adventures, and new stories, and make some really good new content. So I do have hope for the future of Star Wars, and I understand totally the last three movies. I think that we could definitely. I think people are still hungry for it, and I think that when I see the reactions that people are having for these new Clone Wars episodes that are coming out right now, it's people are loving it, and they've got the tone. They've got the tone down, and they've got the action down, and they've got the writing down. So I think they're doing a standout job, sort of helping to keep the Force flowing. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
Star Wars. Yeah. So.
Well, you brought up the Clone Wars, the new, the final season, and last week, or this week's episode, I guess it came out yesterday, as being considered one of the all-time greatest episodes of the Clone Wars. This is a two-part question. Are you watching the new season? And if not, what do you consider the best episode? I know you said you watched them really just once, mostly because of the screening at Lucasfilm, but is there any episode or anything that stands out to you in the series as like, this is the best that we did?
Well, surprisingly, well, maybe not so surprisingly, I'm re-watching the Clone Wars because I have not seen it since I watched the episodes in the screening rooms way back when we were making it. Back in 2000, it was like from 2007 to 2012. I was there. Well, no, 2006 actually. So I'm re-watching it and I'm really enjoying it, and really getting the really seeing what we were doing back then, because when you're in it, it's a little bit different when you're in it and you're working on it. You sort of become desensitized to it in a way, but now that I've been away from it for a long time and I'm rewatching it, I'm going, wow, you know what, we really did a pretty cool job here, and I think the writing was pretty on the mark too. It has the right tone to it as well. Um, but I'm sorry. What was your question again?
What was what was the
Oh, the best
best
episode.
moment? Yeah, or the best.
The
Yeah,
best moment.
you could just say episode if you want to. Just have an episode you're the most proud of.
Well, I can't help it. I mean, I have to say, I love the episodes that feature my designs. I love those. Those are, it's obviously really cool to see those. Maybe the technology and maybe some of the action is not the best, but it's always fun, when you spend a lot of time working on a particular asset and then you see it come to life and watch the characters interacting with it, things like that. So I'd have to say I like, the Malevolence was actually something that I really like. And it obviously reminds me of the movie Sink to Bismarck. Um, let's see, in terms of uh, other episodes that really stand out to me, um, I think the Mortis story arc was something that stood out really well. I did a lot of work on that one. I did the Mortis Arena, and I like where they went with it, and I like how it was written and how it was directed. So, and that one has obviously some very spiritual aspects to it about the dark and the light of the Force and things like that. So I love all that stuff. That's great.
Now, you brought up the spiritual aspect of the Force. That's something that a lot of people have noticed with the newer Star Wars, especially under the Disney regime, because it could be said that they want to appeal to a wider audience, so they don't want to turn off certain parts of the world because of religious implications of the Force and stuff like that. Do you think the Force lost a little bit of its magic when they either tried to over-explain it or when they take away the mystical elements of it?
I think that, yeah, I think it's very important to maintain that mystical aspect. Mythology and myth has always been a very important part of the human experience. And to this day, I think that it's being slowly removed from our culture. And I think that that's not the way to go. I think human beings need ritual, they need myth, because uh, mystery is like, it's one of our, I think it's one of the aspects of being a human being that really makes our lives um, uh, feel um, like being a human being. I mean, mysteries are part of being a human being, and mythology helps to live with mystery and live with um, those feelings. And it's actually, sometimes I think it's better not to have your questions answered. It's sometimes better to keep your imagination wondering about what that could be, or how that could have happened and things like that, because sometimes a good mystery is, I think it keeps the human psyche active. And so, yeah, when you're always answering questions or answering mysteries and things like that, it's fun because you finally go, what a relief. But in a way, I also think that that's an important part of Star Wars. Yoda and the Force, and obviously Obi-Wan, the master teaching the student. I mean, this is a universal constant in human existence, and people resonate with that. And if you take that away, then you're kind of like going, well, what the hell is going on here? Because this is not about human beings anymore. This is about some other something, going on. So yeah, I think that's really, really important for all of us, and for any endeavor.
Now, as we're getting towards the fan question statement, I wanted to ask you this. So you said
Mhm.
you were there until 2012. How early do you remember talks of Disney coming in to acquire Lucasfilm?
I think that, let's see, try and jog my memory. Um, I don't think it was that much time. I think it might have been just a month that we were notified that this was happening. I think I think it was about a month we got an email that this was happening. And then we had a meeting at Skywalker Sound, and we watched the Red Tails, and Kathleen Kennedy was there with George. I think we were watching the Red Tails at Skywalker Sound. And, we could tell there was a big shift going on at that moment because Kathleen was there, and obviously George was handing her the keys. So we could all, it was kind of a strange time because we were all like, it kind of felt like we weren't sure. It's an unsure feeling because suddenly the people in charge are changing. I mean, that's happened in a lot of companies I worked for. I think when Warner Brothers changed hands, Gene McCurdy left, and then some new people took over. You always feel a shift or a rift. You feel like something is going on, and then when that happens, and then you kind of like, oh, am I going to get laid off, or how much of a change is going to go on? Are we going to lose this show or that episode, or you know what I mean? And then when things start to smooth out, then you go, okay, that wasn't so bad. Or when a lot of people are leaving or getting laid off, then you go, oh my God, this is terrible. What's happening? I think it just depends. But when Kathleen Kennedy came on, I wasn't there for very much longer, maybe another month or so when she came on. And then I was gone, I think, by the time I left Lucasfilm, and then that's when I found out that Disney purchased it. So that happened after the fact for me. But the shift was going on when George was already handing her the keys. So.
Now, what was she like? Had you ever interacted with her? Were you told to not talk to her like a George Lucas, or was she more approachable, or what? No,
that was. She just showed up for that one screening, and then we never saw her again. And there was 300 people there, so we didn't. I think a lot of Lucasfilm was there, so nobody spoke to her because she was talking to George, and.
So she hadn't historically ever been involved with any sort of creative elements of Star Wars. She was just there at the company, but not.
Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't know what she was doing prior to that. I know that she and George had worked together a lot on a lot of different projects. I think they probably worked on the Indiana Jones movies together. So she came with some, she had a big reputation, and we were pretty hopeful that things were, going to be good, to continue to be good. But then I never found out because I moved on anyways. So I never found out what happened after that.
I know from a fan standpoint, we have over 1,700 people watching. I'd say most of us, from a fan standpoint, have been disappointed with the direction Star Wars has taken because it lost a lot of that magic. It's become embroiled in, Kathleen Kennedy has said publicly, I want Star Wars to represent the world outside. But, in the beginning of our conversation, you're talking about big, amazing set pieces from movies that changed your life, and they didn't reflect, your front door. They reflected a world that you couldn't get to, a world that was so unique. And yes, there are little elements that, like a Luke Skywalker or the Force with mysticism and spiritualism that brings you into the world. But I think with her, a lot of that George Lucas magic was lost. And even some of the stuff George Lucas, the decisions he made weren't, you've heard us talk about him before. I mean, there's a lot of stuff from the prequels, special edition changes and stuff like that. But, it's definitely changed. And I think a lot of us would argue not for the better. And, as a Star Wars fan, I'm just, at the end of the day, I'm disappointed. And I want to go back because, even I haven't said this to you, but the Clone Wars is what actually made me accept and appreciate the prequel era stuff. I mean, I'm 31, so I saw those movies in theaters. I didn't particularly like the first two, but when I saw the Clone Wars TV show, I was like, that's cool, the Gendy one. And then I got into the show when it debuted in 2008, and I was like, cool, I like all this shit, and I like the clones. I mean, the episode you guys worked on where the clones, there was the degenerative one, and they all he came and saved the day. That was fantastic. You don't see that kind of stuff in kids' entertainment anymore. There's definitely this decline, because say what you want about George Lucas, but he always rode the line with slightly mature themes in a kid's realm, like on that show, because it dealt with
Right.
death and stuff. And I always respected that about him. I miss that. I wish they would have brought that over. They don't at all.
That's the thing I think that is important when it comes to making good entertainment is um, you can make movies, you can write stories that reflect upon our times, like the original Star Trek series. Gene Roddenberry was making a TV series that was loosely based on what were some of the political um, issues that we were having at the time, but he couched it very cleverly in science fiction, and and that's what's really important is you got to be clever about it. You can't make it too overt, you know, and um, if you make it too overt and too obvious that you're making some kind of political statement that pertains to our times, people are not stupid, and they're going to go, "Oh, nah, man, that's not." You know what I mean? You have to, you have to put a mask on it and change it. I mean, the reason why we go to movies is because we want to get away. We want to get away, and we want to be entertained, and have a good time or have a scary time. And I think that's really really important that you do something that see that's a problem I think with if you make movies that are dark, moody, or depressing, you're limiting your audience to people that just want to see like really doom and gloom stuff. So it's all about that. Like I think I think Stanley. I'm sorry. Um, Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas were very aware that if they made movies that they wanted to make, they would not be making any money from them because they would be more artistically inclined. It would be there would be a lot of subjectivity to them, like very hard to understand, and you sort of have to come out of the theater going, now what the hell did I just experience? They knew that, and so Francis Ford Coppola said, well, I'm going to make The Godfather, and that will be my commercial movie, and that'll bring in all the money. And George said, well, I'm going to make Star Wars. Well, George, obviously he made American Graffiti, and then he made Star Wars, but they had to make movies that the public could absorb, the general public could absorb. This is what I think happened with Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick made a movie that was so sort of out there that not a lot of. I remember reading all the reviews back then when that movie came out, and people hated that movie. They hated 2001. They were like, I'm wasting my time. This is a lot of nonsense. I don't know what he's trying to get at. And the movie today is considered one of the 10 best movies ever made of all time. But it didn't make a lot of money because it put itself in a position intellectually that was out of most people's ability to try and relate to it. So it's kind of like Blade Runner. Blade Runner was kind of in that same place, where it had a very intriguing concept, a very, very paper thin story, but it had a really intriguing concept about what would happen if you made, replicants, and then you gave them memories, and how would they respond? I mean, that's a very sophisticated science fiction concept coming from Philip K. Dick, but it was hard for people to understand or to relate to, and so here's where you're sort of distancing yourself from the audience. And so I think when it comes to sort of these new movies, when those politics are put into our movies and they're not put in there in a way where it's not alluded to, or it's not something that's disguised very well, people are going to see right through it, and they're going to go, well, I don't want today's problems. I don't want to be watching Star Wars with today's problems in it. I want to be sent off to a galaxy a long time ago, far, far away. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
don't want to see Earth problems here. I want to see Star Wars problems. But you can couch those problems. You can couch human problems very cleverly I think if you write it cleverly, and that's what Gene Roddenberry did. Gene Roddenberry very cleverly did, an episode on marijuana or drugs. He did very cleverly episodes on war and the injustices and things like that of war. But he very cleverly had his writers write them, and he knew that he was the executives were like going, huh? What? Okay, whatever. Your show's doing well, or you're doing your show. Do whatever you want. So there's that kind of a thing, I think. So just got to be clever about it.
Definitely. I think Rod Serling had the proper blend of that, which I guess subtlety is a lost art, but maybe
Yeah.
he'll make a comeback.
Yeah, Rod Serling, did the absolute fantastic job of because in the end we're all human beings, and in the end we're all going to observe things and we're going to synthesize things as a human being, as our ancestors did, our grandfathers, our great great grandfathers. We come from a long history of storytelling, of mythology, of all this stuff is part of our history. So if you want something to resonate with the public, you need to make something that resonates with the human being. And if you start doing stuff that doesn't resonate with human beings, then it's going to start falling away, and people are not going to, they're going to have trouble with it. And so I think that's what the original Star Wars had. I think back then people were so enraptured with the Force. They didn't know why, they didn't know how, but they were enraptured by it. They're like, the Force, oh my God, the Force. I can use the Force to become a better person. I can use the Force to become a better sword fighter. But in the background, we kind of know what the Force is. The Force is that aspect of human nature where when you're in that place, this is what Japanese swordsmen have said. This is what all people say, athletes. When you're in that place where you're not thinking, where you're just doing and you're just being, that's when the Force comes out. And this is the magic of the human being. And I think that's why the original Star Wars did so well, because it sort of gave us an idea of how to bring out the magic of our abilities, because all human beings have tremendous abilities, but we have to learn through a master how to make them come to fruition, how to make them work, in the way that can help or hinder, or whatever you want to use your forces, your abilities for. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
Anyways, get off my soapbox there about the Force.
I was looking. If you weren't reading the chat was going nuts about the stuff you were saying. They loved that point. I even commented, "This is, I think this is the big point of this interview." Now, I have one final question I'd like to ask you before we get into the fan questions, and this is just your question for you. What would you like to think your legacy will be moving forward? I mean, you have your fingerprints on really important projects to millions of people. If I were to say, Russell, what is the legacy that you think you'll leave behind? What would it be?
Well, in the entertainment field, I've been very fortunate to work on some high-profile, long-lasting projects. I'm very gratified with that. But we don't know what the future holds, and I hope that in the future, I'll be able to get on other projects that can have a lasting legacy to it. I've got ideas and stories that I would like to produce, but that have those kinds of sentiments in them. But we'll see if I can get them made. We'll see if things like that can come to fruition. But my legacy, I'm happy with what I've been a part of, and I hope that in the future, this can continue, because I'm not done yet. There's still a long way to go. I still would love to keep working on new and interesting projects and fun things that resonate, with people. So
Oh, you definitely will. I mean, the quality of your work alone sets you so far above other people. I mean, it'd be impossible for you not to find, to be a part of something else, impactful.
thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Appreciate that very much.
So we have fan questions, folks. We're going to ask these questions to Russell. We've discussed it. If some topics are a little whatever, but we will ask all of your questions. So first off, from our friend Cesare Japan, who says, "Question to our mystery guest, since I'll be unavailable during the stream. Do you personally think Star Wars can be saved/salvaged, or is it a goner/DOA?"
I think it can be saved. I think it people love Star Wars. And I think that I'm saying that it's saved as if it's like been fallen into doom. It's certainly been there's certainly a rift now between the lovers and the haters and stuff like that. But I think that definitely Star Wars can keep going, and I think that I think that the future looks bright. Especially when you see these new Clone Wars episodes, you go, wow, oh my God, those were terrifically well done. So I've already called my friend Stuart Lee, who is one of the directors on, he was a director on the Clone Wars. I think he worked also on Rebels and the last show they did. But I talked to him about it, and I complimented him. And he said, yes, Disney is giving us more time and money to work on it. And these Clone Wars, I think, was or is the most expensive animated project on TV. I mean, I'm not going to say the exact figures, but each Clone Wars episode probably costs upwards of $1 million to $2 million, maybe more, each episode. And when you work on a 2D project, they generally will cost about $300,000 or $400,000. So you got to consider that George put that much money into every single episode to give us the Clone Wars, and that's a heck of a lot of money to put out, without even having a network. So.
But definitely is. I mean, I think he made the right decision though, because the Clone Wars, I mean, we saw a video game, we had toys, we had costumes. I mean, the Clone Wars really was a nice bridge between Star Wars movies are over and Star Wars movies are back, much to the chagrin of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Up next, our friend Zontar says, given the success of the Orville taking Star Trek's place, are there fears at the studios of a competitor doing the same with regards to Star Wars?
Okay, wait a minute. Can you say that
reread it
question
for
again?
you? Yeah.
Yeah.
It says, given the success of the Orville taking Star Trek's place, is there fear at the studio of a competitor doing the same in regards to Star Wars?
I wouldn't know that because I'm not there. I mean, you'd have to be in the circle. You'd have to be in there to know that. You'd have to be in there with the executives and things like that. And I wouldn't know that.
Well, let me ask you a question then. So,
yeah.
So Star Wars had really captured the imagination of multiple generations. But nowadays, because technology's caught up to Star Wars to a point where everything is huge, big budget spectacle, do you think that Marvel is really going to be like this generation Star Wars where it captures people's imaginations and gives them something they've never seen before? Or do you think Star Wars still holds that slot?
Well, yeah, that's actually something I didn't mention too. I mean, I've been really a huge fan. Obviously I said I'm a huge fan of Jack Kirby, and I used to read lots of comic books in the 70s. I stopped reading them in the 80s and the 90s, but I read a lot of them in the 70s, and I just love what Feige is doing, and his team. They're doing an incredible job of bringing Marvel and bringing Jack Kirby to life. I mean, they're really getting the feel of it, but they're telling it in a fantastic way. But yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm watching all their special effects that are going on in the Marvel movies, and watching their space scenes, and all like going, wow. I mean, these guys were definitely influenced by Star Wars, but they're taking it to a whole other level. And so I wouldn't say Marvel is going. Well, I mean, Marvel has captured quite a lot of the imagination of the the viewing public now, and you have to say that Star Wars was the precursor to Marvel, and probably influenced Feige and his people a great deal. But I think that Star Wars, it has its own unique quality to it, and if they can get things turned up again to the Star Wars tone, I think that people would be clamoring for it. But you gotta, like I said, it's got to be written well, and it's got to have that feel to it. It's got to have the tone. It's got to have lots of spaceships and lots of adventure and lots of mythology and lots of the Force. That's all very important stuff. They got to get that back in there and get that feel back. That's really an important part of it, I think. So.
Up next, we have our friend Logan Michael Anti-Funko Pops, who says, any weird experiences at Lucasfilm? What are your thoughts on what Lucasfilm has been doing for the past 8 years, and what do you think of Funko Pops?
I like them. My wife actually collects them. She's got Funko Pops, right? Those are the bouncy head, square-headed characters, right?
Yeah, some of them are bouncy. They're just those weird, like, black eye, like soulless black eye type of thing.
Soulless black eye. Yeah, yeah, they're cute. My wife collects them. I don't collect those kinds of things, but I think they're funny. I think they've got a terrific business model there. I mean, they can make Funko Pops of everything. Every character of every TV show and every movie that's out there. I mean, I think they've got an amazing business model. So that's what I think of it. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, the first part was any weird experience at Lucasfilm?
Oh, gosh. Well, let's see. Weird experiences. Weird experiences that stand out. Let me see. I can't say I've had any particular weird experience myself. I mean, I've had some fun experiences. I was riding my bike down to the gym, and I saw a praying mantis in the middle of the road, and I got off my bike, and I said, "Hey, little guy, you're going to get run over if you stay here. You need to move to the side of the road." And I put my hand down, and he went, and he climbed to the top of my head, or he climbed to my shoulder. And I said, so I tried to put my shoulder over to a leaf or a plant, and he just would not get off my shoulder. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to the gym, so if you want to come with me, So I got on my bike, and I started going down the hill, and I started going really fast. I started going like 20 miles an hour. He climbed to the top of my head. So I had this praying mantis on the top of my head as I was going down to the gym by the cafeteria. And I got down to the gym, and he just jumped right off my head and went right to a bush. So I think he was just kind of using me, as a vehicle to take a ride. But I did not take a swim in Ewok Lake or Lake Ewok.
There's a place called Lake Ewok?
Yeah, there's a pond on Skywalker Ranch called Lake Ewok, and I watched a lot of the guys, not a lot of them, but some of the guys, they said, I got to do it. I got to swim in Ewok Lake or Lake Ewok. And I'm like, I go, well, tell me how it is when you get out. And they get out, and I go, how was it? And they're like, oh man, I'm covered in duck shit. And they'd be smelling like duck shit like for like a few days. So I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. But some people had to do it because they had to do it because it was an Ewok Lake. I have to take a swim in Ewok Lake. I have to do it, you know. So, so yeah, not too many weird experiences that I can actually think of right now. So.
Now, we had quite a few rolling, so we're going to have you answer these just a little quicker so we don't keep you too late, because I know you have dinner and stuff that you have to do.
Yeah.
So our friend Salvador says, I'm curious how the power dynamic and work environment shifted during the regime changes at Lucasfilm. Major changes from top down, or was it business as normal?
Well, you know, I was gone. I left about 3 weeks after the regime change. I think it was about 3 weeks or a month. So I wasn't really privy to seeing all the changes that were going on. I had heard that there were a lot of big changes going on. I had heard when Disney took over, they had their own sound. I think they had their own overseas sound studios or telecine studios, and they were letting go of Lucasfilm telecine. So there were structural changes going on, but I was not privy to them because I was not at Lucasfilm on in the Presidio. I was at Big Rock Ranch at that point. Big Rock Ranch is 10 minutes away from Lucasfilm. I mean, Skywalker Ranch. It's up the hill on Skywalker. I mean, on what's that street called? It's I can't remember the name of the street right now. But anyways, Big Rock Ranch. I was at Big Rock Ranch at the time, and a lot of the shifting was going on in the executive areas over at Lucasfilm Limited, over at Presidio. So, yeah, I don't know.
John Balderdash says, Lucasfilm does nothing but double and triple down on their diversity over story and fans are istophones positions no matter how often they fail. What, if anything, can spark change?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Lucas Valley Road. That's the road that leads from the 101 freeway all the way up to Skywalker Ranch. And Big Rock Ranch is also on Lucas Valley Road. So,
okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Jeff. Can you say that question again, please?
Yeah, of course. It comes from John Balderdash. He says, Lucasfilm does nothing but double and triple down on their diversity over story, and fans are istophobes positions no matter how often they fail. What, if anything, can spark change?
Well, I think what sparks change in is always the financial end. When people go to see something, they vote for it, and as soon as they got your money, they're like, "Oh no, they wanted it, they liked it. We'll make more," or we're going to. My position is set here. I made $6 billion. I'm going to keep making this stuff, and that's how things stay the same. So this is with anything, right? If you buy a product or you vote for somebody in office or anything like that, it's the same thing with going to watch something at a movie theater or on TV. You vote for it as soon as you watch it, and then they think that it's, if enough people buy it or watch it, then they're going to make more. And I think that's why we have all these remakes in Hollywood, is because people just keep going to watch them. Ooh, I want to see this new version of RoboCop. Ooh, I want to see this new version of whatever. I mean, it just keeps happening over and over again, and the quality goes down in a lot of these new movies that were remakes. So I think people need to clamor for new IP, because there's so much stuff out there that hasn't been made into a movie, that hasn't been made into an animated project. And I think that there's so much more stuff out there that can send our imaginations reeling, which is something that we always would like when we're being entertained. So in terms of specifically with Lucasfilm, I think it's the same thing. I mean, I think if people pay to go see something, then it just supports their position, and that's all there is to it. And as soon as people stop paying for it, then that's where the position starts to become, starts to get on the edge. So that's how you can change things.
Up next, we have Private Halo 117, who asks, I can't believe how fast Kathleen Kennedy destroyed Star Wars and divided the fan base. I want to know who can fix the damage she has done to all of us. That is a question for all of you to answer for me. So, do you think? Who do you think can fix Star Wars? Let's just we're acting under the guise that it is damaged. We're playing the hypothetical game. As a creator, who do you think would be a good name behind Star Wars that would, bring it back to what you consider classic Star Wars?
I can't say specifically who that could be. I mean, I think that they're doing a pretty fabulous job with The Mandalorian. But I really do believe that we'll have to wait and see, because it's like not an easy thing to do to get that tone and that quality. And I would like to, somebody had asked me this before, and I really couldn't answer them because I wasn't really sure. I mean, I think Dave Filoni has incredible knowledge of Star Wars, and I think he's doing a great job. I think Jon Favreau obviously is doing a great job too. But when it comes to how they would get it back to that kind of old time feel that we would all like, I'm not really sure. I think we'll have to see. We'll have to see who can build up to that. So.
We have our friend George Forrest Jr. who asks, how is the atmosphere at Lucasfilm? Is it hostile for anyone who doesn't agree with Kennedy's politics? Now, I know you left 3 weeks afterwards, but even if you couldn't answer the direct Kennedy part, how is the atmosphere? Is it hostile for anyone who doesn't toe? Like, was there a company line to follow, or was it more of like a collective of creatives?
Well, in any company, if you're working in any company, you do have to toe the line. Because you're working in the company. You can't be in a company and say, this sucks, I hate you. And I mean, you could, but you most likely will get fired very quickly. So if you have you're casting feeling any negativity towards something, if you want a job, you have to keep it to yourself. But if you're ready to get, ejected out of the place, sure, you can say whatever you want and get in trouble with the higher ups and cause all kinds of problems. But in terms of the time I was at Lucasfilm, I think it was an interesting feeling, because Lucasfilm had never done animation before, and I had been working in a lot of animation studios. I've worked on a few movies and some live action stuff. So I'm back up in the North Bay, and I'm at a studio that has basically never existed before. And so there was this, one of the reasons why I was brought on is because I'm a veteran. I was a veteran at the time, and they wanted some old heads there because they were going to be hiring a lot of young people and new people. And the old heads are really good for helping, with their knowledge and their wisdom and all those other things with new people. So they were definitely, when I was there and we first started at Lucasfilm Animation, there was that sense that this was a new studio, and everybody was new to animation, and the process was new for pretty much everybody, really, anyways, because nobody had ever done this before. So that feeling was always there, and like I talked about earlier, there's always that, the wonderful atmosphere of Lucasfilm, sort of mixed with you got to meet your deadlines, and you got to make sure that this is, a cool thing that you're doing. So, but I tell you that we all really enjoyed being there. I talked to my ex-crewmates who have all moved on, and we get back together too, kind of like Batman. Not quite as big. We don't have these big gatherings, but definitely the concept guys. We all get together, and we have dinner together, and we all look back very fondly at our time there at working on the Clone Wars, because in reality, I was just talking to our editor, the editor on our show, Jason Tucker, and he feels the same way. I mean, Jason Tucker dealt with George Lucas every day because he was in the editing room every day. And we really did have something really special going on there that we all really look back on with a lot of reflection of joy and fondness, for sure. So, yeah. But in terms of what's going on there now, I can't answer that because I'm not there anymore. So I don't know what's happening behind the scenes.
Now, the super chat questions, we do have a few more. Worst case scenario, Russell, would it be possible for me to, not today obviously, but to call you on a Skype call to answer some of these so we can make sure that they were answered for the audience?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. Because I'm going to read as many as we can get through before. I know you got to get going in a couple minutes. A couple more a little longer, but I don't want to leave anyone in the chat hanging. I just thought I would upload.
Oh, how many more do we have? I can shorten my answers.
If you wouldn't mind shortening, I think we can get through them at a couple within a reasonable amount of time, because some of them were a little repetitive, but I'm going to ask them because they did ask. So Swinging Cod, these next couple are just a joke. Swinging Cod says, is this a drinking stream? Swinging Cod, it is not. I've only had water. Silver Phantom X, thank you very much. He says Falcon Punch. Thank you. Now Dion says art, life, things only a Sith know. Thanks, buddy. Makini90 has a question for you, Russell. At Lucasfilm, was it all separated into different departments? Did you have any interaction with, or were you allowed to work with the team working on the Disney trilogy? Which, again, you can't answer because you had left when Disney first took over. But how was Lucasfilm separated?
We had a concept art room. We had the directors on the top floor. We had modelers on our floor in different rooms. So we had modelers, we had ATDs, assistant technical directors. We had the technical directors in another office. So everybody was sort of separated in their positions. Concept artists we were all in one office.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Matt Geese, thank you very much. He sends in $1 super chat. No master, but we appreciate it. Astral Walker says, is the battle between cultures at Lucasfilm, is there a battle between the cultures at Lucasfilm, the woke crowd, which goes against the common sense crowd? Is there a yes man factoring surrounding Kathleen Kennedy, or we'll ask you for the George Lucas since you weren't there for Kathleen Kennedy, or were the employees afraid to criticize her?
Well, like I said, when you're there and you've got a cool job, you want to do the best job you can under the circumstances. So if you look at it that way, you might have to go yes, even when you mean no. You have to say yes. And in fact, when I was working with a production designer, a live action production designer, she said, when you're in this business, never say no. Remember that. Never say no. But you can say, you can alter it and say, yes, but we can do it this way. But don't say, no, I can't do that, but we could do it this way. Just say yes, no matter what. So, yeah, there is that atmosphere because you're there, you're working there, and you want to be there, and you want to do the best job you can. So that's what it is.
I think that's an interesting through line with this entire interview is when you do have a cool job, there are things that you lose and things that you gain from working on the cool job. So I think this entire conversation, I like the little snippets of like how you have to play the game to get, as far, certain places in a career. So I think that's very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're dealing with people. People have egos. People have, they have positions to protect, or they have whatever. They have, we're dealing with people, and people can be persnickety and or they can be very kind, but it just depends, really depends.
Visser Matt asks, for Russell, does the current Lucasfilm understand they're killing the brand? And if so, do they care? Is there a faction left inside to save it?
Well, I got to tell you, I even asked, my friends, but they don't know, and I don't know. I don't know what's going on the inside, and even my friends that are there don't know what's going on, which is kind of interesting.
That's really interesting. So, I wish we would have got to that point earlier because even if people that are in there don't know what's going on, and then there's all this confusion that leaks out into the public. I mean, you got to think what it would be like to be a fly on the wall at some of these meetings because especially with the current crisis and, Disney losing money from theme parks and, you have to look at your slate so many years out. I think
Mhm.
now would be the most interesting time to be working at one of these big companies. Maybe
Mhm.
not the most productive, but everybody loves the juicy stuff.
Right, and you can't be in some of those big meetings because maybe you're not in a position to be there. You're not in the right, you have to be in a particular job to be able to be privy to getting into some of these meetings. So if something strange is going on the inside, and you get, and you're feeling it on the outside, then definitely there's a disconnect going on somewhere, and uh, people are aware of this disconnect that's going on right now. So, but what happens on the inside, you can't be in there. It's kind of, it's like being in the White House or something. We don't know what's going on the inside. We can only tell uh, through news and correspondence and things like that. You know, so
We have George Lucas's Star Wars has a very straightforward question for you. Do you know why the Clone Wars was canceled in 2013?
I'm not certain, but it could be that Disney didn't want to pay $1 million or $2 million or whatever, how much it costs per episode. I think they thought that was too much, so that's why they went to Rebels, and I think Rebels got less than a quarter of what it cost to make Clone Wars, and then and it's, I haven't watched Rebels, but what I have seen, it just looks empty. It doesn't look like there's a lot of assets, you know, in the show. It looks like it's very empty, very deserted, and that's money. Money is rendering time. Money is rendering time costs money, and if you put more stuff in there, it just costs more to make. So if you get less money, you got to make it on the cheap. That's probably what happened. But I don't quote me on that. It's just something that I believe is what happened.
Up next, we have Jonathan Hurst that says, when Disney came in, did the agenda become more important than the story?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what happened.
George Lucas's Star Wars also asks, I mean, this in all seriousness, Russell, your work in the Clone Wars made my childhood. Thank you. Also, do you know why Nix Okami was replaced?
I don't. I don't. I'm not even sure who that is.
Private Halo 117 asks, if given the chance to make your own Star Wars series, would you make it, and what would it be about?
I'd probably try and make it as much as I'd try to make it probably like as much like episode 4. I'd probably try to make it like that as much as possible. Obviously with new characters and new things. There are a couple of things a couple of changes that I suggested that in our show that I put in. I asked Dave about, and he incorporated them. One of them was that I wanted the forces, the space forces, to operate more like a task force in a navy, where you have your giant battleships in the center, and then you have your destroyers in the perimeter, and then you have your lighter, smaller ships even farther out. Your aircraft carrier in the center. And I did tell him, that it would be cool if we could organize the task forces that way, so that we can have more intricate battle formations in space. So that is, one sort of thing that I talked about with Dave. But in terms of like, if I had a chance to do Star Wars, yeah, it would be fun. I would love to do that. That'd be great.
Frank Hernandez has a basic question. Have you ever played the Super Nintendo Star Wars games?
I have not.
Private Halo 117 says, do you take commissions for artwork, and how can we get in touch with you if you do?
I do take commissions. If you, I guess I can give you my email address for my client-based work.
If
How can we do that, Jeff?
if that's something you'd like to do, you can just text me or email me that email address, and I'll make it for the people
let's
to
do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do that.
R. Will99 says, this guy is freaking great. Great interviewing, too. Well, thank you, R. Will99. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've had a fantastic time. As you guys know, we can bullshit for hours on any topic. Dude, I'm like I said, in the back of my mind, I had so many questions, but I'm trying to just, keep it fan focused, keep it you focused, because I was so jazzed to talk about Batman for a minute. I was just like, oh my God.
Thank you, Jeff.
Makiti90 says, were you involved with the later Bruce Timm works in any way, such as Justice League and Batman Beyond?
No, I had moved on after Batman the Animated Series. I moved on.
Joey Bryant asks, was there any talks about Green Hornet show or a crossover with Batman?
No, I have never heard anything like that.
Jonathan Hurst asks, did I see you worked on Dino Riders? One of my faves.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked on that. I was freelancing on that project for a little while. Yeah.
Painkiller asks, how difficult would it be to get an entry-level position at Lucasfilm?
Good question. Probably have to be an intern for a while. Probably have to sign up for their intern sponsorship. And I don't know how they choose people to be interns. But I guess it would have to be like that.
Tito Torres has two. He just wants to say, hello, thank you guys for what you do. Party title. Well, thank you very much, Tito. And he also asked, how does one work for Lucasfilm? So I believe that would essentially be the same question.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to either be someone would have to bring you in. They love your work. You do outstanding work, and somehow you became friends with someone. That's one way of getting in, or the other way of getting in is, and that person works there. Or the other way to get in is probably if you're a youngling and you want an internship, you probably have to do it like that. But I'm not really certain because I never dealt with those areas of employment.
Now, we have a nice one from Steam Crow who just says, one thing I always appreciated about Star Wars was its epic scale, the spectacle, the drive to always show something different / interesting. The art is so important for that. Thank you for your work.
You're welcome. Thank you for the thanks.
Yotam Darkstar just sent us a shaky face wow emoji. Thank you very much, Yotam Darkstar. Makini90 says, with Clone Wars and Batman the Animated Series, they were meant for kids, but they treated the audience as mature, enough to handle the adult themes that were cleverly written. Was it ever a challenge for you to portray those mature moments? Ooh, I like that one, Makini90. That's my favorite question.
No. I mean, I didn't write any of the stories, but I get it. I mean, there's a certain level I think that young people can withstand. I mean, if you think about it, Star Wars, right? They'd have Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen as burning husks, right? And what little kids can handle that, right? So, yeah. I mean, there's a certain level. I think you could take it. I mean, you can't get too graphic, but I also think too, Clone Wars did dive into some really, really dark areas that kind of shocked me. With the Night Sisters and things like that. I'm like, holy cow, this is for kids. This is getting really creepy, So,
well, I have one question for you. Did you ever? Random fan question. Do you remember the moment in Robin's Reckoning how you guys dealt with the death of his parents? I thought that was one of the most subtle but well-handled ways to show a kid's parents die. How the trapeze rope comes out with her on it, and it comes back and it had been cut and it was empty. I mean, like, they just don't do that kind of stuff anymore where it's so clear, but it's also, it can be interpreted in different ways. It's to shield the young audience.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. What's Robin's Reckoning?
Robin's Reckoning is an episode of Batman the Animated Series that tells the origin of Robin, and it actually shows his parents' death. And you guys had done a thing where it shows them in a shadow on the trapeze, and then it just comes back as like an empty cut rope. I mean, just little subtle nods that you guys put that effort into.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're talking about the show almost 30 years later. Because
I think a lot of those decisions also are made by BS&P, business standards and practices, where we would send them the storyboards. And they say, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't show this, you can't show that. So sometimes we had to allude to, somebody getting killed or somebody falling. Somebody, I think we couldn't there was a funny cartoon that Bruce Timm did of Batman going through glass, getting shot with a hypodermic, and falling to his death, and all those things were BSNP. Those were things we could not do. So it's very possible that we artfully tried to make sure that we showed that Robin died or Robin's parents died or something, but we had to do it in an artful way. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, that's what I said. I just wanted to commend you guys for all on that specific show, always finding the artful way to make that happen, because it never once felt like Spider-Man. That show does not age well. People like to remember it a certain way, but it was the Batman show that really had those mature moments handled. Now, here, a few of these are just thanking you, and then we only have a quick few more. He says, Lord Veer, or General Veer says, Lord, my Lord, from a business perspective, how does it make sense to appease the Tumblr and blue checkmark crowd who don't even support the franchise rather than the real fan base? So, Russell, allow me to elaborate. What he means by is, what does it make, realistically, so how does it make sense to appease to a demographic that doesn't even buy or like your product, as opposed to the real fan base who will watch your show, buy your Blu-ray, go see it in theater, buy your toy X, Y, and Z? Like, what do you think the business mindset is to try to appeal to a demographic that doesn't like you in the first place?
Is he talking about the new movies?
Yes, he's talking about the new movies, because it's been online, people say like, well, it appeals to the Reylo fan base, which are the people that want to put Kylo Ren and Rey in a relationship, like these weird fringe groups that haven't really liked Star Wars. They just kind of it gets catered to them because Disney's trying to build a new audience, and it just kind of pushes old people away. We've been talking for nearly a little over 2 hours about the feel of Star Wars and how it's gone. So I think, from a business standpoint, what do you think the purpose of that is?
I can only talk as an outsider looking in, but I mean, I feel like what is going on is there's some sort of agenda there's some sort of agenda going on that's I suppose that they're trying to make fringe groups more comfortable with themselves or something like that, and so they're putting them in major motion pictures or putting them in a popular series like Star Wars. But in terms of why they would do that, I don't know, because in reality you have to consider who likes Star Wars and who has the money to buy the toys, right? Because Star Wars, the money from basically, this is what we do in the entertainment industry for the most part, not all the time, but we make commercials for toys is really what we do. George made this fantastic commercial for toys, okay, and he obviously had the rights to the toys, and he made a ton of money from the toys, okay. So that's what we do in a lot in the entertainment industry. We make commercials for toys. We put emotion behind a toy. We put emotion behind things, and it draws people in. And then people like, I love that character so much, I want to buy it. Well, so when it comes to what they're doing now, I'm not sure. I really don't know. But you have to consider who has the money to buy the toys. Well, people who love Star Wars obviously are people from my era and people who from your time, people who love the original feel and the look of the movies, but the new stuff is sort of like I don't know what's going on. It's like I'm not sure. I really don't know. It's like it sort of defies logic to me, because you want your demographic to be people that can afford to buy the toys, or the people that will love Star Wars and introduce it to their children, and then they can buy the toys for their children. But you can't make it just for children, because if you make it just for children can't afford toys because they don't have jobs yet, right? So there's something going on. There's a disconnect going on somewhere, and I'm not sure what it is. So that's my answer to that question.
I honestly think that's a fantastic answer, because I don't think a lot of people want to think of, well, this is a business, so what demographic can afford your stuff? I mean, that's why Star Wars is one of the only brands that can have dollar store merchandise and high-end $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 statues. Marvel could necessitate that too, but very few other things out there can. Makini90 says, I know you can't explain figures, but would you say that episodes of the Clone Wars were more expensive than Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was ending its series at the time the Clone Wars began?
I don't know how much Airbender's episodes cost, but I would say for sure the last couple of Clone Wars episodes, they definitely had the money to do some nice stuff. They had money and they had time. When you have time, that means you have money, and when you have money, that means you have time. So, and when you have time, you can tweak things really nicely, and they obviously did that with these last episodes. I mean, I was shocked at how beautiful they looked. I mean, the technology is better too. I mean, that's the other thing too. Since 2012, the technology has gotten better, and so the shows look better with all the new technology. I'm talking about software and things like that. So,
Steam Crow says, I agree. It can still be saved, Star Wars. Maybe it's just me, but I feel we really did not care about I feel we really did not care at all about Star Wars. We wouldn't be critiquing it. If we didn't care about Star Wars, we wouldn't be critiquing it. We're the most harsh on what we enjoy, so it can succeed, right? Do you agree with that? Let me reread it so I can ask you again. I agree that it can be saved. Maybe it's just me, but I feel that if we really did not care about Star Wars, we wouldn't be here critiquing it. We're harsh on what we enjoy the most, so it can succeed. Correct? I would agree.
Correct.
What do you think?
Correct. Yes. We love Star Wars. We love the basic nature of Star Wars is, the myth and a wild west, and the myth existing in that wild west of space and adventure, and that is the epitome of Star Wars. It's what made it great.
General Veers says Kathleen Kennedy is Abeloth, and I looked that up. Abeloth is a bringer of chaos in Star Wars, so thank you very much, General Veers. Makini90 says, did you ever work with any projects within LucasArts?
I did not. No, that was another division. That was at that was over at the Letterman building, over in the Presidio, and I was over in Big Rock. So yeah, it was a separate division.
Josh Leake asks, how do you feel about the Force becoming an ex machina, where you can be all and do all, where it feels more like a superpower than a trained skill?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, sorry. How do you feel about the Force becoming an ex machina, where you can be all and do all, where it feels more like a superpower than a trained skill?
Huh. I think that defies humanity. Superpowers. I think people are actually capable of super things, but I think these are things that need to be trained into the human psyche. These are not things that just we have talent. We all have talents, but we have to hone our talents. We have to we have to put training and discipline into our talents to make them work in our society. So I'm not into the superpower thing like that. I don't like suddenly you're born and you can fly over a building or whatever. Anyway, go on.
That's Ray. We just have 5 more, and they're some of them are just thanking you. So with how you felt about Rebels, did you sense that same emptiness when it came to the Disney show Resistance?
I didn't see Resistance. I only watched the trailers, and that was it. So I never watched it. But Resistance had a whole new look to it, and I saw that people were very, very resistant to it. They didn't like it. It didn't interest me, so I ended up not watching it. So.
Up next, we have our friend Ray's Double Dong, who says, was time travel discussed during the Clone Wars?
Time travel?
Yes, was it?
No. No.
Brogans24 just wants to say this was a very good conversation video. Thank you. You're very welcome, Brogans24. Obviously, Russell, I want to thank you for joining me. The next one, Matthew Sturgis says, this has been amazing. Thanks for spicing up a quarantine Saturday.
You're welcome. Oh, but I do have to say one thing about the time travel.
Yes.
We never mention time travel in Star Wars, but when a spaceship goes into hyperspace, it is time traveling because stars are so far away from each other that there's no way we could get from one star to another with rocket engines. We have to bend time and space. So when you're bending time and space, you're time traveling, but it's just not part of, the Star Wars story. That's not really where we go. That's something else, so.
Lance Elato says it's all about the toys. Fans buy toys. Toys keep Toys keep Star Wars relevant. The death of the Star Wars toy is the death of the viable, devoted fan base. Thank you for your work on Malevolence with a thumbs up. That's to you, Russell. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And then this is our final one for the night, which I actually really like to end on this one. This comes from Private Halo again. Thank you. He says, one more pop. Folks, please don't send it anymore. We're going to read the last one because it just popped up. But it says, would you mind doing this again with him so we can hear more about the creative process and on other things?
Well, sure. I mean, if you want to talk again, Jeff, I'm open to it.
Of course I would. I mean, I do art and stuff like that, so I tried to not ask you oddly specific questions because I'm trying to, I want the audience to engage and have fun. But I mean, I would love to talk about your breadth of work or anything else entertainment related. If you want to come back on, I'd love to have you back. I mean, just to tell the audience, we met at a party once. We talked for a good couple of hours over dinner, and we were just, hanging out. So, I mean, we've had discussions before. I'd love to have another one.
Yeah, that'd be great. And the thing too about the creative process, I mean, that's something that is always fun to talk about too. How you come up with ideas and how you execute them and things like that. That's all really important stuff. Diving into the imagination, So.
Oh, definitely is. I find you talked about Jack Kirby. I'm a big comic fan myself. I love to hear some of his thought processes into the fourth world and some of his some of the notes that Stan Lee would put on his, and just the genesis of a lot of early Marvel, and then I guess would be mid DC stuff because I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a different time back then. But
I love the fourth world. Yeah, I love that stuff. It's incredible.
Now, final comment from GPS Spectre. He says, if we wanted to let Bob or Lucas, if we wanted to let the Bobs or Lucas, they made a good choice and say thank you. Is there an address to write to?
Who's the Bobs?
I guess Bob Iger and Bob Chapek. They're the CEO and the former CEO of Disney. So I guess they're just looking for a fan letter address. Would you know that?
No, I wouldn't. I think the only way to thank them is to buy their toys and go see the movies and buy everything that they've made. And that will thank them enough. They'll appreciate that kind of thank you.
All right. So, folks, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. Russell, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. It's been a fantastic stream. Thank you for staying a little longer so we could address all the questions from the audience. Folks, I'll be back on Monday with Fandom Menace tonight. I should have a video out tomorrow. I got a bunch of stuff. The what's her name? Leslie Headland and all that Star Wars stuff. I haven't made a video yet because I'm putting all the pieces together for a bigger format video. And then I actually went out into the field yesterday, broke quarantine to go film some Star Wars toy content for you guys. So be on the lookout for that. I found something that's been on the shelf for 5 years. It's a new record in the box wear shows. So Russell, before we go, is there anything you'd like to say to the audience or anything you'd like to mention before we head out?
Well, I'd like to thank you all for listening in on our conversation, and may the Force be with all of you.
Perfect ending. So from all of us here at World Class Bullshitters, thank you, folks, and as always, be excellent to each other.
Thanks, Jeff.